just one little problem is that we have not yet passed the nudges phase, it feels like.
Hey guys, I'm Generalization, author of Navigating Service Design and a passionate explorer of how design shapes human experiences. So this year, I'm on a mission to dive deeper into the minds of strategists, designers, innovators, and researchers for pushing boundaries in fields adjacent to service design. So through these conversations, I hope to uncover fresh perspectives in the evolving landscape of design strategy and innovation. In today's musing, we have Claudia Simoa, policy and behavioral science consultant. She holds a PhD in experimental social psychology. She's an educator at heart. She uses LinkedIn to share open and free applied research tools on a weekly basis. And now she is transitioning to independent consulting, focusing on behavioral science, experimental research, and public policy impact. Thank you, Claudia, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tunisia, for having me. So yeah, it's true. I'm a consultant for public policy and experimental design. I do research methodology. At the same time, I'm an adjunct professor at the university here in Lisbon, so the Catholic University. I teach advanced research methods, applied research methods, and data analysis for psychology, which is actually my background. So as a PhD. Besides that, I do this weekly volunteering on posting free and open access resources, because I do believe that knowledge should be free and accessible to everyone.
That's amazing what you do, because that's how I even discovered you, because I was going through all your research tools that you kept sharing, and I was wondering, who is this person who is so generously sharing whatever she's finding? I haven't been able to do that myself, and I have learned so much from what you've shared, but sometimes it gets very overwhelming. And I am not sure what methods to use, which tools to use, how to go about all of this, right? So, if I was a student of yours, where would you tell me to start, and how do I understand these methodologies? Do you have a favorite place that you start off?
Starting on the sharing, it's true that because most of these audiences or people that I connected with in LinkedIn, they are actually very general. Like, it's a general approach. So I try to bring what's general and could be of interest for researchers, behavioral scientists, but also designers, for example. But on the other hand, if you would have to start, I would tell you to start you should always start by the question that you want to ask, actually. I mean, this is our genuine interest on something in the world, and then we ask our question, and this is how you start. And based on your question, all the rest will basically disenroll. So either can be a quantitative methodology, can be a qualitative methodology, could be a survey, could be an experiment, could be focus group, could be interviews, but it should start always on what interests you in the world. What do you actually want to know? That's the starting point for everything.
So when you have people reach out to you and say, Claudia, we need your help, what are the kind of questions that they have in their mind for which they need someone of your expertise, of your knowledge? Let's say they're not researchers or strategists, they're pure business people. What is that nudge for them to reach out to you? What are the kind of questions that they ask? Can you give us a few examples?
Sometimes people are lost, so they don't know exactly how to get started. For example, imagine like it happened before, working on something related to designing interventions, but these interventions, if you're talking about the business side, you need to actually have so much into account, because when you want to implement an intervention or you want to implement a program, what happens is that most of the time it's not you, so it's not the researcher who is going to implement that. So you would have to have a field team that most of the time it doesn't exist. So sometimes people don't know how to get started. Other times also people want a little bit of mentorship. So how can I, dig deeper into like a researcher career, or where can I start to, learn more about behavioral sciences? So it is really general, like very general, but and diverse what people try to get out from these questions.
Do companies invest enough in behavioral science research? Have you noticed that? Because we have a lot of students picking it up, but is there opportunities for them to work at companies? Is there a companies investing in behavioral science research?
It's growing and growing. So if you compare to like 10 years ago, like it's massive. Like it's impressive how much companies, not only but private sector, but also governments, how much they invested in behavioral sciences. On my own opinion, there's just one little problem, is that we have not yet passed the nudges phase. It feels like nudges are these magical beans that we just plant there and they will magically solve the problem. And there's more to that than to behavioral science than actually the nudges themselves. So there's many interventions that you can do. There's really like digging into data, like previous data that you have, that you can bring insight and try to design to improve the policies that you have already in place. Or even for the companies, you can start your own program of designing whatever that impacts like positively the life or the quality of life of your employees. Could be a behavioral science approach here that doesn't have necessarily to be nudges at the end. But I think we are passing on this, like through this, but this for the last years the focus has been mostly on these nudges, on this, and not so open on the like richness of behavioral science. What does it have to offer? Because it is a big field. It is actually, it's not a field per se. It's a mix of different fields. So psychology contributes to it, sociology, anthropology, economics, of course. Informatics. There's you drink bits and here and there from many disciplines.
I think nudges is something that everyone's aware of because of Misbehaving, the book Misbehaving, and Richard Thaler's work, and we have a book on nudge as well. So what is beyond that we are missing out on, who are non-behavioral science researchers? That can you share that with us? Can you share with an example? It would be easier for us to understand what is beyond a nudge.
Well, you have nudges, but you have any other types of interventions. Imagine that when we talk about nudges, we talk about, social norms. We talk about many things that you can actually use here and there to, implement little changes that are sometimes not visible. And they are supposed to act to change the behavior to a more desired one, right? So this would be, but sometimes also the nudges, the problem with that is that you would have to have you would have to be nudgeable, right? So imagine that if you have like a strong norm about something, even if I tell you about other people's social norms, this nudge would not act on you, because that you would have your own values, your own traits, and that would be difficult. So this is the discussion that one size does not fit all. You cannot apply this to everyone, and this is where it comes the importance of moderators, for example. So these special situations or these personality traits that are already there, our personal values, for example, that where nudge does not does not perform well. But besides nudges, of course, you have many other things that can be used, like design interventions that don't have to be necessarily with nudges, for example. You can use many other things, but experimental research, it's one type of thing that you can use to test different interventions, and that does not necessarily need to be a nudge. It can be imagine like something else that you change in the environment. It can be changing the color of a room, for example, to see if it makes you calmer or more agitated, right? So that would not be a nudge necessarily, but it would be an intervention. So you would learn from other research. So evidence-based is the most important thing. Learn from other research, design your own intervention, and see whether it changes or not the behavior that you want to change.
So, when you say experimental research, what is the sample set for an experimental research? And does that apply for a larger audience after you experiment with a small sample set? This has been my challenge. So, I'm just asking you because I work with farmers and we work with a small set. And when we want to apply it across, it just gets very difficult. So, how do you do that?
So if you think about where do we always start? We start with the sampling, right? Sampling is the most important part, or one of the most important parts. The closer your sample is to your population, so the more you can have the characteristics of the population mirrored in the sample. So what you are going to measure in your sample, it's going to be more and more accurate, and the results that you are going to find, if when you basically infer from your sample to your population, your sample is actually pretty close to your population. But what happens there maybe is that you work with a small sample, but this sample, it's quite specific and not so much like representing all the farmers, because they will have different characteristics, maybe living in different cities, maybe facing different challenges. And then what you have, it's like a maquette that you are actually using, that it's not the best fit of a maquette. So it's like it's very specific for something that you want to generalize for a larger population. Ideally, you would have a wider sample and a sample that has more mixed characteristics. And then, of course, from this, you would have to learn about specific situations or characteristics of a subgroup of people where this or that could work better. So one experimental condition or one treatment could work better for a subgroup of people, whereas another treatment could work better for another subgroup of people, regardless of all of them being farmers.
So you said that you guys, even at the government space, there is a lot of behavioral science research adopted, right? Can you share what kind of challenges behavioral science research is leveraged, and how long do you take to learn? Because why I said government is that the population is so huge, your sample can't represent the entire population.
No, yeah, of
So
course not.
how do you, what is your timeline like? How do you balance this? How do you go about it? Can you give us an example so it's easy for the viewers to understand?
Yes, so behavioral science is leveraging basically, when you talk about policy design, for example, what you are doing is before implementing this policy that you think it's a good one, what you are doing before is you're experimenting. And you're experimenting and see whether your ideas, they actually work.
Yeah.
Your ideas, our ideas, I mean, learn from the literature, so forth and so on. So this is what it's leveraging. It's evidence-based, and it's not based anymore in, you and I just discussing here this and that, but more on, I learned this from the literature, I'm testing it with my specific population, because it might be that it worked on X population, but it's not working anymore on Y population, because we have the cultural values here that do not allow that we can actually implement the same changes we implemented in one culture to another. So contexts, they actually matter. So this is what is leveraging basically. It's the evidence-based policy design when we talk about governments, of course. And what you try to do, you try to have like a population, like you're also not investigating something that applies to everyone in the population. So when you design a policy, there's a specific target group that you should be targeting for learning more about this. So basically testing your hypothesis. But there's another thing that you can do is that when you collect your data, you can try to have it as representative as possible. So you can try to have it mirroring the characteristics of the population in the country. So let's say that we are 50-50 women and men, for example. So you try to have it based on this kind of quotas. Let's say that we have 30% of young people from ages of X to Y, and then 20%. So you try to basically have this, so collect randomly your participants, your sample, but also mirroring the characteristics of the population in percentages.
Yeah, because what I've noticed that is with businesses, the easiest way to solve a problem is to add either a fine on it or give the customer extra money for doing it. Like, for example, if let's say in a government space, we are noticing that, oh, the younger generation today don't want to conceive and they're pushing making like for making babies into a much later age, which is harming their health. It's also reducing the younger population in the country. So let's say if the government wants to encourage young citizens in their country to conceive and have family, how would you approach a problem like that? If I, from a government side, I said, hey, Claudia, I'm not sure what to do. This is what the citizens of my country are doing, but I need to make sure that the average age of my country is much lower. Right now, it's increasing. I need more younger generation in this country. So, how would you address a problem like that as a behavioral scientist?
Yes, so basically the fines and penalties, it used to be one way of doing policy design before. What you learn from the behavioral science is that this is probably not working, because if it would be working, we would need to improve our policies. Of course, that the design itself, it would come from like a literature review, learn what has been done, and also some ideas on shared ideas on with people that are actually on this target group that needs to be addressed, right? So the co-design with the population that we want to design for, this is exactly what we want to do. We want to learn from them what would work better. Based on this, you would design something that would encourage them to perform the behavior, instead of actually policing them and penalizing them for not performing the behavior. So that would be the difference. The difference would be to have incentives that would actually make people more aware and interested, but the penalties are actually something that it's more and more out of date for the policy design. That's what I mean.
So, as a behavioral scientist, what you would do is you would gather people who are of that age that you want to influence a certain behavior, and would you understand why they are not um, executing that particular behavior first, and what is limiting them from doing so, and then
Exactly.
you introduce it. How, like, what are the methodologies, and how long does a study like this take?
So you would always start with what's there already, what has been published, maybe some case studies from the same country. So I would probably go to my, to institutions that work with this target population on this specific problem, learn if there's any data, if there's any evidence that we can already use. If not, you could just run a short survey, or just to learn a bit more about the problem. So what influences this, what are the relationships between the behaviors and the beliefs and the society, why it's not happening. And then after that, I would run a short focus group with maybe 1 or 2 or 3 groups, just to learn more about the problem, learn more about the potential solutions, because if you already know a little bit about the problem, it's also important to see how you, being the target population or the target group, would solve this, no? And solutions, of course, you could have like as creative as possible, but then you would see that when you do focus group and you repeat it twice or 3 times or 4 times, some solutions will be coming constantly, and you know that this is a potential intervention that you can test and see if it works or not. So that would be the next stage. It would be to design an experiment, because experiments, they allow us to, attribute causal effect relationships, and I would design an experiment to test whether this intervention would, or this treatment would actually work better than what's now in place, so the business as usual status quo.
But for an experiment to work, do you do this in an experimental environment, or is it in their own natural environment? Because when I run experiments as a service designer, we do a lot of prototyping and testing. But these are these environments are not the actual environments with the kind of other variables that maybe the farmer or our field teams face. So in the prototype setting, it looks like, oh, this is going to work. The entire service structure is perfect. When they hit this particular issue, they can reach out to our support team and they will solve the problem. But the moment we set this up in the actual environment, there is a network problem which we never accounted for, and every time they get there, they're stuck, they're not able to reach us. So how do you set up these experiments, and how do you account for the variables in an actual environment?
Yeah, so this is a tricky question, because ideally, when you do like a highly controlled experiment, you do it mostly in the lab, right? Where you isolate this factor or this phenomenon that you want to study, and of course all the variables, they are totally not totally, but mostly controlled. And you can learn a lot about this phenomenon. Of course, when you move from this highly controlled setting to an applied setting, it doesn't exist anymore, because many factors will be there that you cannot do anything about it. You try to do that, but it is true that they are different worlds. Applied, but then you also learn a lot about the applied research field, experimental research field, that you cannot learn from the lab research.
Right.
So ideally you complement, but it's not always possible to complement both approaches, and we work mostly with the applied setting. So it's a tricky question, right? It's just for me, just before scaling up, before the implementation, you might want to run a few more tests, maybe change a bit the population, maybe run a second or a third test. Then you do monitoring and evaluation and see what can be improved or not.
Got it. Because now I've stopped doing experimental setups in a lab environment. It's mostly applied research that we also conduct, because the kind of variables that we encounter is the main challenge for our field teams. So when you're conducting an applied research, what are the methodologies that you generally reach out to, and how do you set it up?
Well, mostly, survey design, it's of course one methodology that it's very used, like across many fields and many research questions. So this is quite important, and also it brings a lot of information as well. So it is very useful. Of course, on a different setting, it's just to learn more about this or that specific behavior phenomenon. On the other hand, if you want to learn about what works best, of course, it always depends on what your client wants, right? So if you want to learn, well, how can I change this behavior specifically? you maybe have already survey data, and then you design an experiment, right? Even though it can be a survey experiment, it can be like a field experiment, but something that you can actually set up an intervention or a pre-post study, for example, where you measure before you set up the intervention, and then this does not qualify as an experimental design, but you have a pre-post design, so you know how the behavior happens before you intervene along the way, and then you measure again, and then you'll see if the intervention made any changes from pre to post, right? So this is one way. Again, another way, if it's something that it's not so known, it's a phenomenon that we don't know so much from the literature or from program data, what we can do, we can use qualitative research. And I know this in the applied setting, we use it much more than we use it on the fundamental research setting. It's not really comparable. But also because you have to deal in the applied setting with the importance of the context, that it's not taken so much into account in the fundamental setting. And I'm not saying that the fundamental setting does not believe that it's important. This is not what I mean. It's just different the way things are approached. Here, the context, it's really important. It's real, because it might be changing from one group to another group, like of let's say cities even. It doesn't have to be countries. That the context changes, and what you learn here, it's not exactly the same what you will learn there, because the challenges from, let's say, city A are going to be different than the challenges of city B, for example. This could be another type of methodology that you would use when you have to, address these contextual challenges. When you have to design also treatments, and as we were chatting before, designing, it's important to co-design with your target group, right? Because this is where you learn the group would think that it would work for them, and not what I think it would work for them. Because my reality, it's not going to be exactly the same. So this is important, to just sit down and to listen and to ask questions, to see whether what I have in mind, what I learned from the literature, it's actually going in the same direction as what these people think that would work for them.
So I'm going to ask you a tricky question, since you're in the education space as well as in the workspace, okay? So when you are in the education space, there are some frameworks, methodologies, a lot of tools, everything that we are teaching students, we adopt. But when you come to the actual work environment and context in where you have to exhibit all of these frameworks, methodology, nothing works. You have to be really quick on your feet, get very creative. So how is that your similar experience? Like, does whatever frameworks you teach in class, can be directly applied on a field setting? Because that's not been my experience. I want to know from you, since you work in both these spaces.
It's a really tricky question. I mean, I think that the challenges are really, really, really different. No, and when you do design theories and frameworks, and they are sometimes a bit more rigid, and they follow a set of steps, and you should start on point A and end on point, let's say, D, and all should flow. But the truth is that the challenges that we face in the applied setting are totally different. So one thing that I do with the students, I teach them, there's this course about applied research methods, and of course I teach them the frameworks, and of course that at certain point in class there's time for one applied project, which is a field experiment. And this is where you see like all the challenges of even simple things like randomization of places or even of participants. So the challenges are, frameworks are not ready for all the challenges that we face in the applied setting, and I hope this is a question, an answer that it's diplomatic.
Where I have made my peace is that I've realized that the frameworks and tools just give you enough confidence to make those changes. Like when you're on an applied setting, you know that, okay, I won't be able to do the ABCD of this particular framework. I'll have to skip the B or the C. But you know that you've skipped this and you can take a more conscious approach towards the D part of the entire framework. So how I have made my peace is that yes, I've learned a lot of theories and frameworks when I was in college and when I'm reading books and looking at research papers, etc. But when I'm on the ground, it gives me enough tools and confidence to approach a specific problem in a specific way and be confident about the approach that I'm taking. I think that's where I've made. Is that a similar experience that you've had as well?
I think so. I would say that this is the best approach, is to use it as a guide, like a guide to help you structure what you need to structure, whether this is the design of an experiment, where this is the implementation of an intervention. Use it as a guide, but it cannot be unflexible enough that does not allow you to make your own changes here and there that would better fit to the context that you need to have it fit. So it should be like it could be work like nicely as a throughout guide, but not necessarily that everything will fall exactly on each category perfectly.
Yeah, no, this is giving me a peace to know that a professor is also addressing the problem in a similar way. But yeah, is there anything interesting from your past research that you've done in the applied space that you would like to share with the viewers? That I think we can close this conversation with a nice story from your side on how you did applied research and what was your learning, or you weren't able to learn much about it. It would be a great story to end the conversation with.
What I can tell you is not necessarily with a very specific example, but just to tell you that I worked as a fundamental researcher for, I think, 10 years. I worked in the lab, I did experiments, I did, I supervised master theses, and it was all very clear to me, very, this is the process, it's very simple, it depends, we want experiment, we do this, we want survey, we do that. We didn't work so much with qualitative data, although I did a bit qualitative studies along my career as a fundamental researcher. But then I moved to the applied setting. And this is a totally different world. This is what I want to tell you. It's like so rich, of course, challenging as much as possible as you can imagine, but it's really, really, really rich. And you learn a lot from not only students, because fundamental research, it's basically it's based on student sensors, but this is how it goes, at least for psychology. Most of the participants, they are students from the universities. You don't hire, you don't go to the streets and talk to people, but it's still valid, it's still great. But the applied setting brought me so much to learn that I didn't imagine that. And this is probably also something that I want to leave it here as a maybe a message for those who listen, is if you are doing fundamental research, if you are a PhD student, or if you are a student, master student, just go out there, because it's the most important thing to me. It was when I had the experience of, matching both of them. So I learned so much, solid knowledge on the fundamental part, but I was so much challenged on the applied part that I think I learned even more. That would be my message. Keep both in mind. That would be very important.